They can't keep us too close together. We'll get in trouble. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This gentleman here, I think, needs absolutely no introduction. Mario Batali, the owner of many great restaurants, writers of many great cookbooks, celebrity chef. I mean, I can't even begin to think of all the things that you've accomplished in this short time, as you are so young. Today we're going to talk about your new book, American Farm to Table, but I wanted to start out with one of the lines that I read early on in the book, which was that you are of the position that farmers are the new rock stars. And I thought this was a title exclusive to chefs. How is this shift now happening that farmers are rock stars?
Well, it occurs to me that if you really want, if you are looking to be able to make food as good as chefs or as delicious as chefs purport to make. A lot of people ask me, what kind of sauté pan should I buy? Or what kind of knife should I buy? Or do I have the right oven? Or do I need an immersion circulator? Do I need whatever? I don't know. We still use burners and fire and metal, but it occurred to me that the quickest way to creating delicious food is by buying the same ingredients we buy. And when we say farmers, we don't just mean guys and gals that grow vegetables or apples or anything like that. Also, oyster farmers, veal, chicken, pork, all of the things that are important to us. If you source like we do, you stand a chance to making remarkably better food. You also stand a slight chance of spending quite a bit more money. But if there was anything going on in America that should be possibly unsubsidized, because if you ever bought a chicken in Bologna, or a capon around New Year's Eve when they want to make the capon broth. Your capon, or 5-pound capon in Emilia-Romagna last December 27th was $160.
Wow.
And it's because they realized the importance of having the right one and not the wrong one. And as far as they're concerned, Italians, Bolognese, but as we should all be concerned, if you're buying something and you're actually going to put it into your loved one's body, then it should probably be the one thing that you scrutinize the most, not the least. Right. And it would seem that if you go to giant box grocery stores, which have many good options, that if you're not paying attention to all of those details, you might as well just take unknown prescription pills as well, because that's effectively what you're doing. Here's some red ones. I like red ones today.
The green pill or the red
pill?
pill?
The green and the red. It's Christmas.
That's great. So I want to engage the audience here for a second and just get a good sense as to how many folks here in the audience shop at either the New York Green Market or at Italy for your fresh produce. Okay, so then can we assume that the balance of you are getting your greens from a local supermarket, bodega, gas station, whatever it might be? So as we
He doesn't mean to insult you when he says that.
No.
Okay.
You can go to a local drugstore these days and get produce in a bag.
There's sushi across the street at, what's the drugstore called? Dwayne Reed has sushi.
Yeah.
All right, I have one thing to say to people who eat the sushi from Dwayne Reed. You're gonna get it.
Yes, they probably will.
You may not be paying now, but you will soon pay for that bad decision.
From our local sponsor.
Right.
So with this sort of little litmus test we did here with this poll, I guess what it really speaks out is that there's this new movement of folks that are going out of their way and they are paying those additional prices. But as you talk about the accessibility of all these farms to major cities, do you think that we're on the precipice of a shift? Do we think that now all these small farmers are going to start making their way into the cities, and that when we do this talk next year for the annual celebration of our talk, that we'll find that there's a greater number of folks that are now going to the green markets?
Well, I would hope so. I mean, I think in the state of farming in the country right now, that the small farmer is actually doing okay. And this is in support of the small farmer, because under about 100 or 120 acres, they're capable of selling all of their product at the super premium price of a green market or a farmer's market. And when you say super premium, maybe it's 10% more, but their take on it is 60% more. So it's a successful idea to reward the actual farmer as opposed to the distributor, which is kind of how America goes. In the 100 to 500 acre farms, they're having a real trouble because they're not able to create, as opposed to creating a real farm product list, they're growing 2 things or 3 things, and they're really that much more sensitive to the market pricing, telling them exactly what they can and cannot make. And then there's industrial-sized farms over 500 or 1,000 acres, and they're doing all right now too, even though what they're doing is they're creating a monoculture of soy and corn, or soy and one other thing, for example. And as opposed to having apples on one side and corn on one side and wheat on the other side and garbanzo beans on the other and chickens in the coop, they aren't built they're built like a factory.
Right.
They're more effective, they're more efficient. People who are really paying attention to their food, not only its nutrition, but more significantly possibly its deliciousness, are buying from the small farmer because they have a variation in their crop and they move their crops from soil to soil, from piece to piece, from plant to plant. Dan Barber lays this all out very clearly in the third plate, which is his idea about how we should be considering developing our food resources as a long-term strategy. But in the short-term strategy, for me, and although farm to table almost sounds a little slogan-y for me, what it really means is that you're really concentrating your efforts and your considerable appetite and your thought process in creating good, fulfilling, nourishing, and politically correct food. My kids are 16 and 18, and when they were buying things, whatever they are at this point, not necessarily because we taught them so much, but they're making political decisions based on the kind of products they're buying because they look to see whether they have a 501c3. If Mattel has a 501c3, they find out what it's for, or a sneaker company, and they find out what kind of social good can be driven from their purchase. And it's not that we brought them up smarter, it's just that's how they think, and it's a different way. So this generation that's coming at us, and the generation that is populating both reading your magazine and coming to my restaurants, is thinking about this in a different way. And it will be good for all of us if we kind of understand that and do what we can to do it. There are still food deserts in the country where you have to drive 80 miles to get to a big box store. Yeah. So, but if you go on the USDA website and enter your zip code, it will tell you where the closest farmer's market is no matter where you live.
So that's a perfect segue into my next question, which was, as I was reading the book, I noticed, there's some true food destinations that we all know: New York, San Francisco, even Austin, and of course the farms that were related within local distance or driving distance of those towns. But there were a couple that I don't think any one of us would have necessarily thought of as farming communities or would be able to support. Las Vegas, for one, or Tampa. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, above all, I think what's happening is that the general dominance of San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York is slowly fading. And not in a bad way, in a good way. Meaning that the sous chefs who've worked at Babbo or at Per Se or at Dominique Crenn or Stars or any one of these restaurants, they've gone off to discover their own heart. They've come back to the big cities. They've realized that it costs $400,000 to $500,000 to open a small restaurant in New York City. But if they go back to their town in Mississippi or Tampa or Austin or somewhere in Minnesota, they can build a restaurant because customers are so interested in the food that they can make their art statement. Maybe they're not selling it for $150 prefix menu. Maybe they're serving it at prices that are a little bit different and lower. But they're creating a sustainable opportunity for them to own their own business with a much less high threshold. Tampa, a good friend of mine, Greg Baker, the chef at a place called The Refinery, was kind of the linchpin behind this. We were just sitting out having drinks at his restaurant one night, and this book idea came about, and I was talking to him about his farmer. He has a farmer named Rebecca Krasnowski who has Nature Delivered, which is a pork farm. And the way she treats her animals, the way she grows her animals, the way she understands their breeding, the way she understands their feed, the way she understands how important it is not to have antibiotics in their feed is evolutionary, kind of, because it's kind of returning back to our grandma's way, wherever my grandma was buying her stuff. Maybe your great-grandparents, all right, kids. But that generation is now starting to drive the boat, and we're seeing that they're attentive to all of these different things. Most significantly, the delightful potential of something celebrating its own region as opposed to buying something all from California, which is what you do in the winter no matter what. Mm-hmm. But if you have a growing season and you can celebrate and support farming in a way that also does good for the soil and also does a representational flavor of the soil's content when it gets to the plate, then you taste something that you haven't tasted. And when you have an oyster in Pemaquid as opposed to an oyster in the Gulf, there are two entirely different flavors. I would argue that as a chef working in the Gulf, I want my oysters to taste like the way the wind blows on a Thursday night after I just saw some crazy concert, and that would seem to be as an important modus operandi for me as a chef to capture that local flavor. So that's what we're doing. And as opposed to it being chefs, it's really as much about the farmers now.
Right. So then, as native New Yorkers or tri-state area folks, what should we be eating for dinner tonight?
Tonight, I would say that there is the bluefish are running big, and if you capture them and eat them on the day that they are, it is one of the most unique flavors from this area. Peconic-based scallops started last week. Wild stripers are running 30, 35 pounds, and you can get them for like $3 a pound if you go to a big fish market, and $25 a pound if you go to a fancy one. But at the end of the day, those costs are subsidized, because this book is a lot. There's protein in it, but the large portions of protein that we are used to eating in restaurants, between 6 and 10 ounces on any given plate, they should be pushed, in my opinion, they should be pushed a little bit to the side, and maybe you should consider eating 2 or 3 vegetables and a grain and a little bit less protein, just as a way to extend your longevity. And it's an interesting way to also support the different movements in the food world. That's where we are in our restaurants now. We're not shortening the protein because we're trying to save money. We're shortening the protein because we want our customers to live longer.
Right. Yeah. Well, keeping your audience base alive is definitely part of our strategy. It's a good business plan. So it is, of course, a cookbook. So it wouldn't be fair if we didn't dive into the book. Are there any favorite recipes inside here? Anything that maybe is seasonally fresh for our autumnal friends?
Well, I would say that this is the first time I've ever written a cookbook about American cooking like I do at home. Almost all of the other cookbooks, except for the NASCAR cookbook, where the recipes were generated by restaurant experiences and travel around mostly Italy. And those recipes were exactly that. They were fancy, they were somewhat elaborate, they were somewhat time-consuming. A lot of the recipes in this book you can make in less time than it takes Rachel Ray to do some of these recipes. That is to say 30 minutes or less. And I would say that the flaw of most American home cooks is to consult the recipe book first, then go to the store. And what I would suggest that you do is go to the store first, buy the best, least expensive, most seasonal stuff, and come back and figure out a way to slide those into the recipes that you have. So there's this carrot frittelle recipe, which is in the first 5 pages of the book. And it's shredded carrots, and then you throw a little rye flour in, and eggs, and panko breadcrumbs, and a little grated cheese. And then you cook them like little fritters. They're kind of like latkes. But you could make them with sweet potatoes. You could make them with shredded Brussels sprouts. You could make them with acorn squash. And what I would argue is that Americans are a little afraid, home cooks particularly, are a little afraid of something they don't recognize. And what I would suggest you do is go to the store and buy something you absolutely have no idea what it is. And then take it home. And if it's a vegetable, if you cut it into 1/2-inch pieces, turn your oven to 450 degrees, put it on a cookie sheet, sprinkle it with salt and pepper and a little drizzle of extra virgin olive oil, and put it in for 15 minutes. No matter what it is, it will be ready in 15 minutes. That is not to suggest that you should not buy this book. But it's that philosophy of understanding and being familiar with the opportunity to change any recipe in this book to any ingredient you find. And as opposed to you want to make chicken pot pie, you're definitely going to go have to buy a chicken. But maybe you're going to buy carrots and cipollini as opposed to red onions and turnips, or like whatever, all of those things. If they're similar in texture, then their flavor combinations, provided you don't add too many things to one particular dish, are going to be delicious. And it's more about getting the viscosity of the condiment or the sauce right and having the crust be right on the top. And that's just more that happens more likely if you have a tendency to leave things alone and not touch them so much.
Yeah, I think the idea of looking at recipes and finding inspiration in them is something that, the home cook is starting to do more and more. One thing that we find on Bon Appetit is often the best part of the recipe is actually the comments left by all the random folks who love to come to the site. My favorite ones are typically the one where you're looking at, let's say, a roast chicken recipe, and the comments will say, well, I didn't have the walnuts, whatever it was, so I replaced it with this. I didn't have the other thing, and I didn't have the chicken either, so I replaced it with salmon, but it came out great.
See, thinking like that, though, is smart.
Yeah.
You probably shouldn't roast a whole salmon for as long as you would roast a whole chicken, though.
Temperature.
Yes,
just
exactly.
Temperature. So I don't think we'd be doing due diligence either if we didn't ask what your favorite autumnal fruit or vegetable was this season.
I always go for the stuff that takes a little bit more time. In the same sense that when I go to somebody's restaurant I never choose the steak au poivre because I can make that at home. I choose something that I know took the prep cooks 8 to 10 hours to make, and we have 2 of those. Because that represents something I'm not going to make at my house. For that simple reason, I would say that right now when the fall is just full on here, one of my favorite things is a vegetable called quince. A fruit called quince, which is kind of like an apple, but you can't eat it raw. You have to cook it. And when we cook it with pink peppercorns and a little bit of vanilla and a sugar syrup. And then when it's cooked like that, then you can make it into an apple pie, or you can make it into applesauce or quince sauce or preserves or make a jam. It's got a lot of pectin in it, so it creates a nice thick kind of gel when it sets, but it's one of my favorites.
That sounds great. That sounds great. So I don't know if we want to open it up to the audience for questions. Do we have a microphone for them out there? Do we have any questions for Mario Batali? We do. The young lady here in the aisle in red.
Hey. Hi, Mario.
Hi.
How are you?
Excellent.
I'm Flora from Butterbeans. We serve healthy school lunches in New York City, and we teach kids how to cook. My question is, what is one tangible thing that the audience here and the people listening to you could do to create a positive change in the food system besides shopping locally and supporting local farmers and trying new foods like you mentioned?
One thing besides those 3 easy ones? I would say that evaluate and concentrate on the products of things outside of that, of the staples, and start to think of different varietals of wheat. Try to think of ancient grains as opposed to processed grains. Try to remove processed food and, above all, salty and sugary snack food from an option at your house. And get people to be more comfortable with eating vegetables like we described, either raw or cooked in the oven very quickly or simply, and using them as snacks. I think our bodies are trained now, because it still thinks, even in the 20th century, our bodies think, oh my God, there could be a famine just around the corner. So when there's an opportunity to eat a whole cake, you eat a whole cake, because God knows there might not be any cake tomorrow. But limiting the choices of processed carbohydrates is probably our single biggest problem. And it's only successful as a business because people eat them all the time. I remember when the first protein, no carbs diet came out, and everyone lost 30 pounds. Well, that's because they'd been consisting on donuts and muffins. So when all of a sudden you can't eat donuts and muffins, and you think, well, maybe I'm going to have a steak, and there's no steak at your office, then you don't eat. So basically people were limiting their calorie intake, but they were certainly getting rid of the super processed sugar, salts, and carbohydrates. And so that's the business decision you're doing when you're avoiding that. And thinking about it that way, you could still make a good potato chip if you want one. It just takes a few minutes to make it at the house. And you get really good potatoes, even if they weren't local. They could be a really good potato from somewhere else. And fry it simply and dress it with your own crazy version of cayenne and salt and a splash of vinegar. All of a sudden you have a snack that isn't killing you, and it's doing the right thing in a political decision sense.
That's great. So I'm going to ask one more question of Mario. So as you were developing these recipes, did you try and look back to what you were talking about a little bit about your grandmother's style and a little bit more rustic? Is that what we should expect to see here?
I think what you'll see is, yeah, kind of. My grandma's style was really old school Italian, and I was decidedly trying to make this an American book. But there's chicken cacciatore, and there's a recipe of my grandma's spare ribs that we serve with pasta. But, there's also very simple things, just like grilled chicken thighs with a green apple salad. That isn't necessarily a traditional dish, but makes all the sense in the world when you're cooking at this time of the year. There's a sauerkraut dish where you make it yourself, and it's easy and fast and served with pork chops. There's ideas about how to brine things, whether you want to. You don't have to if you don't want to. And then there's a lot of really good desserts, and desserts are often the most challenging or frightening things for a lot of home cooks because they think of it as the domain of pastry chefs. But to make a tarte tatin, you can buy really good frozen puff pastry for $7, and apples aren't very expensive at all. With a little sugar and butter, you can make the most delicious and elegant-looking desserts that will blow your friends away and make you happy while doing the right thing. So,
yeah, apples in a cast iron pan and some cinnamon,
exactly.
And I think you're all set. Did anybody go apple picking this season? Anyone? Yes? Oh, okay. Well, I think, again, by this time next year, I hope all of you went apple picking. This is support your local
maybe you went
farm.
Brussels sprout picking. It could have been any one of those.
Is that a new trend?
Not yet. It's on AOL right now. It could be trending in 5 minutes. Who knows?
Boom, it just hit
Exactly.
Twitter.
The Brussels sprout farms are inundated by people like zombies headed for the market. Bring me the sprouts. Batali said so.
I love it. I'm going right now.
You need a pretty nice knife because it's got a very thick stalk, and you wouldn't pick one off the vine. You would cut the whole vine and carry
Just
it.
take the whole thing and then bring that
I would
home.
argue, though, wait on the Brussels sprouts because it's after the first frost that your cruciferous vegetables become even more fragrant and delicious.
Is that right?
Absolutely. Would I lie to you right here now on
would-
AOL?
on live.
Exactly.
Interesting. I hadn't thought that. The favorite way that we love to make Brussels sprouts is to peel them. You peel them off, toss them with a little bit of salt and lemon zest, and then just bake that in the oven till you get these really fantastic
Crispy
chips.
leaves.
Yeah, that's my favorite. My daughter Ruby, and we make those based out of a recipe in San Francisco.
Oh,
that
nice.
we at a restaurant tried to reverse engineer it. Do we have another question for Mario? We do right here.
We talked just a little bit about trends. I'm curious what some of the more overplayed trends you see in the restaurant space. I know we see it a lot in New York restaurants, and curious what some of the ones that you could do without.
I must say, this whole slogan of farm to table is driving me nuts. My question is, where were you before? Where did you get your stuff in the first place? That said, I'm never tired of really good food. Well, I'm tired when the lemmings chase last year's molecular gastronomy down the hall and try to trap it somewhere. But if it's good food using good products, I will never get tired of a roast chicken. I will never get tired of David Chang. I will never get tired of a lot of things that people are starting to percolate that they need something new to happen. So my only query or my thought about complaints in the restaurant business is flash photography by customers and flash photography by customers. You're sitting there having a normal meal, and there's flashing lights going on all over the place. The phones that you have, all of your smartphones, they all do much better without flash photography, and you're not disrupting anybody. I'm not one of those chefs who says you can't take pictures of my food. You bought it. Of course you can take pictures of my food. Mm-hmm. Tomorrow it's going to be poop anyway. At least you caught it in its good light. Yeah.
I suppose the alternative is the buddy light when your friend turns on their phone light for you and then you capture the picture. But
that's always overexposed.
Yeah. Well, angles. No matter. We
You
won't get
spend
into
a lot of
food
time with
photography.
this?
It's a tip I learned recently, and the buddy light works out. I'm just saying. How am I
Also,
going to?
you know what? I'm also tired of buddy lights. All right.
Damn. There goes my Instagram feed.
There you go.
Nothing. Was there another question? There is right here.
Hi, Mario.
Hi.
My name's Rachel.
Hi, Rachel.
My question is, how would your sous chefs describe you?
How
This
would
is
my
live,
sous chef
so be
describe- That's all
careful.
right. I think that my group, in particular, has made it evident that if you come to work and show interest and work hard and stick around, that from Poe in 1993 to 25 restaurants now, 8 in New York City, all of the chefs that work for me now as my partner, or work with me now as my partner as a chef in a restaurant, started as a line cook. I've never hired a chef. We hire line cooks, we develop a trusting relationship, we develop a similar palate. And that doesn't mean they still might not describe me in some fear. But that would be only the fear of me catching them do something that they knew was already wrong. Our food is very straightforward. It's not like there's shortcuts that you could take. So I go in there and I'm hoping to be perceived as their ally. I know they get a little nervous, but I would say that they know and fully expect that I'm supporting them and that I know 10 years ago, I would say that we spent 100% of our time on our guest satisfaction. At this point, we spend 50% of time on our guest satisfaction and 50% of our time on our employee satisfaction. Because happy staff, given the opportunity to do the right thing and in the knowledge that they eventually might be the partner and share in both the upside and the heavy responsibility that is, they're going to stay with you for a while. And that's, I don't think it's revolutionary, but I think in the restaurant business, that's still something that a lot of people aren't catching on to. So that, I hope, answers your question, and that with a certain amount of fear, they love me.
Fair enough.
We have, right here.
Hi, Mario. I'm Kelly, and I also
Kelly.
work with Flora here at Butterbeans. In addition to school lunch programs, we also have a summer camp program and cooking classes. And the entire intention of those programs is to get youth exploring culinary empowerment, and something that You said about the philosophy of understanding and being familiar with the opportunity to change a recipe is something we're constantly striving towards. So I wonder if in your experience in the restaurant business, you have come across examples, excellent examples of that educational aspect, of breaking down the barriers that I think sometimes exist around the art, the culinary arts, in terms of making people feel like they can't approach that, working with food. And so if you have any examples working in your field where of excellent education initiatives.
Well, I mean, in the restaurant business, the cooks learn by fire. They learn very quickly what's good and what they can't do. We have printed recipes, but they're written in kind of a culinary shorthand. So as far as how we train people, we train them as quickly as we possibly can. I have spent some time working in the last 5 years with the Food Bank for New York on developing an educational program that starts in food pantries with the children and their caregiver, whether it's their brother, their aunt, their babysitter, or their grandma. And developing those recipes to help them even identify something that we would think as easy as 2 different kinds of apples or the difference between a yam and a carrot is a big piece of the missing link right now in nutrition, and helping young people particularly, because a lot of the strategies that you're going to live the rest of your life with are clearly set by the time you're 5 or 6. And it's argued that it's even by 3 or 4. Giving the opportunity to children of any economic persuasion to be allowed to be a part of that and understand that will certainly be a big part of the cure to our problem. Our problem is not just getting rid of potato chips and the Coke machine at the schools. It's about eradicating the need or the lust for those flavors and giving them the opportunity to know the joy and happiness that happens when you cook together with people that you love or just know. And that's always been a part of my family, and we were lucky, and we weren't like trendy or hip. It was just that's how you grew up when you were in the middle class in Washington State in the 60s and 70s. You went to the farmers markets because it was something to do. What we would do when we got home is, as a family, collectively work to make pickles or pies or something like that, and understanding that getting out of the processed food world is the first step to all that. That's where that education has to go.
All right. We actually have 2 pretty popular Twitter questions coming through. One, people want to know what's in your green folder. And
What's in here?
Yeah.
This is a safety blanket of all the farmers' names in case I was going to spell them wrong. So I wanted to make sure I have it right here.
And
also $10 million for the person who guesses the number on page 3.
And 2 people are interested, people who visit your restaurants, they seem to notice a different type of music than most other restaurants. They want to know about your relationship with music and food and how those 2 mix.
I am a big fan of music of many different kinds. And I tend to play whatever happens to be on my iPod. And as a matter of fact, all of my restaurants have a copy of my iPod. The playlist they can do certainly, but I can also tell them every now and then when something comes out that I want to hear it a little bit. And we play it at a palpably measurable altitude, meaning that one of the things when you walk into a New York City restaurant, as opposed to when you walk into a smaller town, even around here, New York City is an energetic place. And when you walk into one of my restaurants, you might not even not like it, but you cannot deny the incredible feeling of excitement and joy that's going on around the tables and in the kitchen and with the staff. Because we're still very excited about what we do, and the way that we make sure that keeps happening is that we constantly educate ourselves and constantly challenge ourselves. But having pop or opera to a certain extent in the daytime, music play when you're eating grown-up food was one of the great things that I think Babbo helped people understand. And that you could sit around eating lamb's tongue vinaigrette while the Cure were blasting gave me great joy. And it still does. So yes, we play a lot of music. We play it loud sometimes, and hopefully you like it.
So aside from The Cure, is there another favorite artist that...
I would say The Clash has always given me great joy. But, I listen. I would say I'm a fan of a lot of interesting, mostly West Coast hip-hop music, but I would say that the only hip-hop record in my top 100 of all time right now is Twisted Dark Fantasy by Kanye. And I would say that we play that a lot at our restaurant, and I think it's fucking awesome. But that's not necessarily measured against all the rest. I'll play Jay-Z, of course, because he's a hometown hero. Mm-hmm. But, a lot of other hip-hop and rap music is still filtering into my psyche as we go.
Awesome. Well, Mario, I thank you very much for joining us today, and I thank
Thank
all
you.
of you for your pointing questions.